Gary Kah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Tamara. Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to be back here, and hasn't a lot happened since February when I was last here. Things keep moving along in the world, don't they? But anyway, this evening I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to give just a quick overview of what I'd like to do. With everything going on in the Middle East, I felt that it was appropriate to spend a significant amount of time on that up front. And then I want to look at 3 different meetings, gatherings that are being planned over the next 11 months. That if everything that takes place at these meetings, that is scheduled to take place at these meetings actually occurs, the world could be a different place a year from now. And we're hoping that that doesn't happen, but we need to be aware of what is being planned. And then finally, in the last segment, how we should respond, how to react to this, what we can do. So, and you know what, last time when I was here in February, after we left, we thought of this. I never even mentioned our publication once. So a lot of people didn't even know we have one. So I'm just going to, up front, real quick, we do a quarterly publication called Hope for the World Update. It's usually 16 to 20 pages long. I write the lead article, and then we have usually about 8 to 10 other contributing research writers from around the world, from the contacts we've developed over the last 30 years of doing this. And they write really excellent articles that are dealing with the most important issues of the day. And so we would hope that you would consider subscribing to that publication. You can do it back to the book table, or go to garykah.org, just myname.org, and you can subscribe there as well. And that also helps us to exist, to do what we're doing. So by you subscribing, it helps us to keep doing these very things, taking a stand on these topics, trying to connect the dots to see how things are interconnected and why we need to know about this. We cover all of that. And then also my 2 books are back there and a few other items. Well, praise the Lord that we can still gather like this. You know, it's easy to take it for granted. I mean, there are people around the world that can't. And we don't know how much longer we will have these freedoms. So we need to cherish them while we have them. And I know this is a difficult topic, and people watching the news over the last few days, you know, my dad is going to turn 92 in a couple of weeks, and he's a World War II survivor. He fled from the communists at age 12 in Croatia, where he grew up, and less than a year later, at age 13, he fled from the Nazis in Austria. And he's reliving everything he's seen on television. He said they were pulling women out of the houses, beating them, raping them, taking stuff away. Some people he knew he never saw again. And, you know, very similar to what just happened in Israel. And so, unfortunately, we live in a fallen world, and until Christ returns, takes us out of here, I could stand up here and tell you America's best days are still ahead, but I wouldn't believe it. I just don't believe that's the case, and I need to be truthful with you. And when you look at the Bible, too, and look at the prophetic word, from this time forward, there may be some plateaus and moments of reprieve, but I think for the most part, things are going to get progressively worse. And we've been forewarned about that in Scripture, so we cannot ignore that. Excuse me. During my free time, I have the honor and the privilege of serving on the board of directors of Operation Exodus USA. I've been on the board since 2013. This is an organization that has helped persecuted Jews from around the world make their way back to Israel. Most of them from former Soviet Union countries, but over 50 countries in the world that we have assisted Jewish people in to make their way back to Israel. And I'm also on the board of the international, kind of the mother organization, which is Ebenezer Operation Exodus, and they're headquartered in Bournemouth, England. And so the Operation Exodus USA, their focus is on the USA. The international Ebenezer Operation Exodus is on the whole world. And so through that, we've been blessed to have just some amazing contacts worldwide. And almost on a daily basis are finding out what's going on in different parts of the world, but especially right now in Israel. We have an office there with 3 full-time employees and then a couple of others stationed around Israel. And last week, 2 days, I believe it was, 2 or 3 days after Hamas's attack, I was doing a WhatsApp with my friend Jeremy over there who heads up the office. And he shared all kinds of things with me that's going on there, and I'll share some of that with you. But about 20, 25 minutes into the conversation, I could hear the sirens going in the background. He said, I've got to take cover. So, I mean, that's what they're living under all the time without knowing what's gonna happen next. But his son is in the IDF, and he was among those who had to go south and clear out the bodies. And he said it was so gruesome words can't describe it. It was just a complete slaughter. And now his son is poised to go into Gaza. They're waiting and holding back. But something else that my friend told me is that there were as many people going north, IDF soldiers going north, as getting around the Gaza area, positioning themselves around Gaza. And that hasn't been covered by the media. The Israelis, they're not dumb. They know that there could be an attack coming from the north as well from Hezbollah, which would actually be far worse in terms of the damage that they could do. So you've got right now, their interests are split between Gaza and up in the north. Hezbollah, by the way, well, Hamas, thus far, as of today, has fired about 7,000 rockets over into Israel. By the way, they fall on a monthly basis. You just don't hear about it in the media. They don't cover whenever Israel gets attacked. They only start covering things when Israel fires back, which is kind of interesting. But 7,000, roughly. To put it in perspective, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon has over 150,000 missiles and rockets. And these are precision-guided, many of them with GPS. So they can actually target things pretty accurately. And even though Israel has the Iron Dome defense system, if you have 20 missiles aimed at the same target, it's going to be hard to knock out every one of them. They're going to get through. So there's going to be a lot more loss of life in this war than previous wars, like back in 73 and 67 and on other occasions, unfortunately. Iran has been the main supplier, and they also have state-of-the-art drone technology and other things. So we'll see what unfolds over the next week or so. Then there's also Syria. My friend told me that, now this was last week, he told me that 10 top generals from Iran had just moved into Syria. And so clearly they're prepping Syria in case they are going to launch a third front attack from there. And then, of course, there's the West Bank, too. So there could be 4 different places where Israel gets attacked from. Now, in Syria, it gets really dicey because you have had Iranian advisors in there for a long time, but now top generals are in there. But along with that, I'd say most Americans are not aware of the fact that Russia has had military advisors in Syria all along. They've never stopped being there. In fact, at one point, they were essentially running the naval station on the Mediterranean. A little bit of Syria touches the Mediterranean Ocean. There's maybe, 50 to 70 miles or something like that, if I had to guess, maybe a little bit more than that, where Syria touches the Mediterranean. And they've relied heavily on Russian technology and know-how there. And so, you've got Iran and Russia and Syria and Hezbollah, all of that coming together in Syria, and which makes me wonder. There is a passage of scripture. Damascus is the capital of Syria, and some of you know where I'm going with this. And there is a prophecy in Isaiah 17:1. It says, "An oracle concerning Damascus. See, Damascus will no longer be a city, but will become a heap of ruins. Now, what's interesting is that Damascus is the oldest standing major city in the world that has never experienced mass destruction. It goes back about as far as Jerusalem, but Jerusalem has been destroyed at different times, not so with Damascus. And so depending how this war unfolds, and if eventually the main attack comes from the north or northeast through Hezbollah and Syria, and the main supplier, all the weapons to Hezbollah come through Syria from Iran. They come straight across through Iraq and then Syria and into Lebanon. So Syria could end up being a big player in all this. And if Israel gets its back to the wall, who knows what will happen there, because they only have 4 minutes to respond. That's how long it takes from anything detrimental fired at Israel from Damascus. Some people believe that Iran does have the nuclear bomb now. They've had enough fissile material for a while to develop a nuclear bomb. What we don't know is if they have all the technology yet to be able to mount it on a missile. Some people believe they're working on it right now. Some believe they have it. And that's why they're so bold to allow Hamas to do what they're doing, because they've got it now. Others say, no, it's just around the corner. They're getting close. We don't know. The fact is we don't know. But so far what we've heard in the media is that Iran had no idea about this attack from Hamas, but that is really difficult to believe because Iran is the chief funder of Hamas, and they pretty much know every move that they make in advance. So just a little bit of background on that. This morning, Fox News had on a really good interview. It was with Mossab Hassan Youssef. He is the son of one of the founders of Hamas, one of the founding leaders. And he renounced Islam and became a Christian a while back. And we need to pray for his safety and continued boldness, because I can't imagine, he's got to be careful where he goes and where he travels to, being who he is. But he said, among other things, he said, this is a religious war with a global agenda. The goal being total control of the world and the annihilation and complete destruction of Israel. And that's essentially been said by these players themselves. But he said Iran is at the core, the main influencer in all of this. But it goes deeper than that, and I'll get into that in a moment. He said Israel is doing the Palestinian people a favor if they can wipe out Hamas, even if the Palestinians don't realize it at the current time. Because any supplies going into Gaza, Hamas snatches them up and does something with it. So the $100 million that Biden just announced that's going over there, it's going to go through Hamas because they control everything. They're not going to build hospitals and infrastructure and that kind of thing. Yet we've been sending money over there for how long? Anyway, back to Iran for a moment. Iran is the main supplier right now and financial backer, but it does go deeper. Just a little bit of background. Hamas was founded by the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood goes all the way back to the late 20s, 1930, around then. Little known fact, they were officially allied with Hitler's Nazis. I'm not just pulling that out of thin air, it's a fact. That's how far back the Muslim Brotherhood goes. And that's why even in their training and some of their videos, as of a few years ago when I saw it, they marched in a goose step just like the Nazis did under Hitler. That wasn't a coincidence. They go back that far. They were a big help to Hitler in the Middle East back during World War II. Anyway, this is the organization that was responsible for launching Hamas, and they've also had influence in Hezbollah and some of the other Mideast terrorist organizations. Now, Egypt kicked them out. Remember the Arab Spring that took place? When Egypt caught on to what they were really all about, they ousted them. And so they went on and took up residency, the leaders did, in Turkey and in Qatar, or Qatar. And those are the two countries now where the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood is. And so they too have a significant influence still over Hamas. So they're a major player in all of this, and they have contacts throughout the world and lots of funding. They don't lack funding. Now let's bring it here to the United States. Over the last 3 years, at least 70,000 illegals have crossed our southern border from 12 different countries that have supported terrorism. 70,000, that's just what we know of. So how many came through that we're not aware of? It'd probably be safe to say at least double that. Now, I'm not saying all these people are terrorists, but they're coming from countries that have supported terrorism. And so even if it's just a fraction, 5%, 10%, you're looking at thousands of potential terrorists that are in our country right now. We would be extremely naive to think that we can have an open border the way we've had and not have terrorist countries seize on it and bring them in. So they're here, and it's just a matter of time till they do something. I have no clue when that's going to happen. It could be tomorrow, it could be a month from now, but at some point we're going to be faced with that. Israel's just the foretaste of things to come, unfortunately, in my opinion, unless there's a miracle of God. Some statistics. Gallup poll back in 2013 did a poll over 1,000 American adults who are Democrats, and they surveyed them to see where their sympathies lie. Do they lie most with the Palestinians or most with the Israelis? So this was in January of 2013. 19% were with the Palestinians, 55% with the Israelis. Now, they did the same survey again in February of this year, 10 years later. And now, those who are in the Democratic Party who were surveyed, 49% are with the Palestinians and 38% with the Israelis. That's a huge shift in 10 years. I mean, that's like a flood. That's a complete turnaround. So it went from 19% to 49% support for the Palestinians. So there has been a radicalization, a far left, more than a trend, just almost a free fall in the Democratic Party. And so that makes a lot of sense. Now, with what just happened in the Middle East, maybe some sympathies have, at least for a time, shifted, but I don't know how deep that support runs for Israel. It's pretty much conservatives and evangelical Christians who have been supporting Israel because they realize they're an island surrounded by bad players. And when Hamas, well, let me go back. There's so much to try to piece together here. Do you remember back in 2005, George W. applied a lot of pressure on Ariel Sharon, then Prime Minister, on Israel, to get all Jews out of Gaza and hand Gaza over to the Palestinians. A lot of people don't realize that Israelis, Jews, used to live in Gaza. They had farms, they had businesses, everything. And so I remember seeing pictures of the IDF going in and pulling people out of their homes while they were crying, and some were kicking and screaming, and even some of the IDF soldiers teared up because they didn't want to do this. But that was pushed by the Bush administration. A year or two later, during the elections, and Hamas ran for office on the platform that if you vote for us, we will utterly destroy Israel and wipe every Jew out. They won't exist anymore. And they were very open about that. And that was news around the world. I mean, anybody could know that. I'm not telling you anything new here. And over 60% of the Palestinians voted for Hamas, knowing what they stand for. And so I do feel sorry for those Palestinians who didn't vote for him, but the vast majority did. So there's so much hatred there and a willingness to support terrorism that, you know, in a sense, I mean, a nation ends up getting what it deserves ultimately in time. And so what you have now is just a mess. And you've got kindergartners being trained how to kill Jews and committing to spending their lives killing all Jews. It's in their cartoons. It's all over the place. So how do you separate those who don't support terrorism, who are decent people, including a small percentage, very small percentage of Christian Palestinians? How do you separate them from the terrorists? It's a very difficult task. The Christian Palestinians, they had to close their last Christian bookstore a number of years ago because of the persecution they came under. They couldn't exist anymore. They had to go completely underground. So it's not just Jews, it's Christians as well. So that just gives a bit of an overview of the situation that we're facing in the Middle East and also in this country. Now, if you're wondering, again, why now? Why did Hamas launch this terror attack right now? And again, keep in mind that the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a globalist organization, has a lot of influence with Hamas still. Well, back in June, in our summer issue, I wrote the following. The name of the article was Accelerating an Accelerating One World Agenda. I knew it was accelerating something, an Accelerating One World Agenda. And I saw how quickly things were unfolding. Didn't know exactly when things would happen. And believe me, I do not claim to be a prophet, but I'm just a student of the Bible and also of current events based on the information that's coming into us from around the world on almost a daily basis. And so I just want to share with you a few paragraphs that I wrote back in June, and it kind of connects the dots a little bit further. I wrote, another incentive for the acceptance of a new order or global system of governance is the hunger for world peace. By stoking the flames of war, globalists seek to manipulate public thinking to the point where humans will accept any new system that promises peace. If the world was already in a state of relative peace, there would be no reason for people to accept radical change, since everything would be fine as it is. Thus, from the viewpoint of global planners, this must change. The threat of world war and the possibility of human extinction must be etched into the human psyche. Therefore, a military crisis of staggering proportions must be created in order to push their one world agenda over the top. While the Russia-Ukraine conflict continues with no end in sight, tensions in the Middle East are mounting. Iran is now believed to have enough fissile material for a nuclear bomb and is most likely in the technical process of trying to mount such a bomb on its missiles. This ability to achieve nuclear capability is largely the result of weak U.S. policies toward Iran, which have enabled that country's militant leaders to get to this point. I personally believe this has been by design in order to force Israel's back to the wall and set the stage for a larger conflict. Iran has repeatedly threatened to wipe Israel off the map and not only is close to nuclear war capability, but has already supplied Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad with thousands of advanced rockets and missiles. They are in place, aimed at Israel. To make matters worse, Iranian and Russian soldiers and technical advisors are on the ground in Syria. So Israel is surrounded on all sides except for the far south. So here is Israel's dilemma. Again, this was writing back in June. Does it launch a preemptive strike in order to have a military advantage, but in so doing provoke the hatred of the world against it? Or does it wait to respond until after being attacked, thereby losing its advantage but hoping to keep at least some global sentiment on its side? My view is that Israel will be hated worldwide no matter when and how it responds. So it would be to Israel's advantage to make a preemptive move sooner rather than later. But regardless of how this looming battle unfolds, the potential exists for many more Israeli casualties than in previous wars. Whatever happens militarily in the Middle East, it would likely also engage Russia because of its presence in Syria. Thus, the war in Ukraine and the war in the Mideast could merge to become one expansive war. In the chaos surrounding such potential terrible events, global planners would be certain to take advantage of the situation to accomplish their bigger purpose, the implementation of a world government system to rule over mankind, all in the name of world peace and replacing a broken system that they intentionally ruined. Theirs is a demonic pursuit. Their master is the father of lies. At its core, this is a spiritual battle between good and evil, God and Satan being played out. in the physical realm. And I think that's what's happening right now. As Youssef said in the interview this morning, it is a religious war. I mean, it's demonic, it's satanic. And my friend in Israel, when I talked to him last week, he said at this moment, he does not see a reasonable path for de-escalation. In his opinion, he thought things would keep intensifying. So I have to wait and see. In my book, 32 years ago, when it came out, I had a quote in here from arguably the most powerful leader of the most influential secret society in the world. And this statement was made decades ago, but it gives you an idea of where they ultimately want to take this. And before I read this quote, the term terrorist is fairly new in our vocabulary. The first time I heard of it was during the Iran hostage crisis when Jimmy Carter was president. That's kind of when that term was coined. But prior to that time, any maniacs who go out and just want to kill people and commit genocide, they were referred to as nihilists, from the word to annihilate, same root word, okay? So just keep that in mind as I read this. So here's the quote. He wrote, "We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a great social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to all nations the effect of absolute atheism, the origin of savagery and of most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the people, forced to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization. And the multitudes, disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will be from that moment on without direction and leadership, anxious for an ideal but without knowledge where to send their adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer brought finally out into public view. A manifestation which will result from a general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time." End quote. In other words, they want to create such a massive crisis in the world that would bring people to their knees thinking this is it, the world's going to destroy itself. And pitting the superpowers of the world against each other. And you see that taking shape between, right now the US is supplying over 60% of the weaponry and funding to Ukraine. And so we're basically at war with Russia through Ukraine already, and it's escalating. And now we've got this situation going on in the Middle East as well. So I don't want to discount the influence that the Lord can have, and He can change things and give us more time. He can do that. But I personally believe if that's going to happen, there's got to be a shift in our country like we haven't seen in a long time, a massive repentance. God's got to have a reason for intervening and pushing things back. And hopefully that will come. Hopefully what's going on right now in the Middle East is a wake-up call. But remember 9/11? People went to churches for 3 or 4 weeks afterwards. 2 months afterwards, it's like hardly nothing happened. People thought, okay, we're okay, we'll move on. And unfortunately, America has gotten to be that way. Back in the olden days, Americans were much more vigilant. But nowadays, we've come to take our standard of living for granted, our freedoms for granted, and people no longer take a stand the way they once did. And unless that changes, and like I said, people repent, get serious about the Lord, I believe things are just going to keep going in this direction. Now, in part 2 this evening, I want to cover some meetings that are coming up. Again, I'm not predicting, I'm just telling you what these people have planned. I've researched this, we have their information, a lot of it, and so I'm going to share with you what they are planning, much of it in their own words. A meeting of very strategic importance called COP28 the 2023 UN Climate Change Conference, will take place in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates from November 30th to December 12th, which is just around the corner. COP stands for Conference of the Parties. This is the 28th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, those most powerful forces involved in the global climate change movement, which, if you haven't figured it out, is very one world. They're pushing globalization in every way that they can. That's what it's all about. Sultan Ahmed Al-Jaber, the Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology, and the United Arab Emirates Special Envoy for Climate Change, has been appointed as the COP28 President-designate. In a letter to the parties dated July of this year, this incoming president announced that COP28 will focus on several paradigm shifts. In other words, major changes, turning points. It includes the fast-tracking the energy transition and slashing emissions before 2030. They're targeting 2030. That date is all over their documents. They want to have everything in place fully by 2030. Also, they want to transform what they call climate finance by delivering on old promises and setting the framework for a new deal on finance. And what that involves is a global redistribution of income. They hope to get the emerging countries on board by promising them lots of money and help to make changes related to the climate agenda in their countries. And that money is going to come from the West, from the United States, first and foremost, and from Europe. So that's how they hope to get the poorer countries on board. So they want to get every country involved in this. Although COP28 will be held in the UAE, the United Kingdom is expected to have a significant say in matters. Unbeknownst to most people, King Charles is viewed as the de facto leader of the global environmental movement and has come to play a very pivotal role at these meetings. And it goes all the way back to the early 1990s. Some of you are old enough to remember the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit. Remember that? That was the launching pad for the public launch for the climate agenda. He played a major role in that, along with Mikhail Gorbachev, Maurice Strong of Canada, and Stephen Rockefeller of the United States, and a few others. But his role was so important in all of this that the Brazilian environmental activists built a statue of then Prince Charles. And he looked like Mr. Atlas, rippling big muscles. It's almost a joke. I mean, you could probably go online and see it. And of course, it was his head on the top of it, but this guy was bulked up. And so they flew him from England to Brazil for a special ceremony to unveil the statue of him. And it was a big to-do. And so even though, over here on this side of the pond, and I've seen him oftentimes as just a goofball. How can you take this guy seriously? But behind the scenes, he exercises a lot of influence. And he's got influence, I heard a couple of weeks ago, through some various trusts and business organizations of at least $30 trillion. So, he's able to, if he can get these business leaders to agree with him on things, he can establish international trends with that money. Another point of interest, Pope Francis has come into a close alliance with those at the forefront of this movement, including Charles. The official, just keep that in mind for a second. I want to cover one more thing, then I want to come back to that. The official COP28 global mandates will go into effect on December 13th, the day after these meetings wrap up, and will launch a 7-year plan for full implementation by the end of 2030. That's they're coming out and just saying that. So we will see what transpires. Along with all of this, and this is where the Pope comes in, he's tied right into COP28, a special interfaith compound in Abu Dhabi, which is another city in the United Arab Emirates, not far from Dubai, In that city, a compound has been erected called the Abrahamic Family House. It opened in February and is going to be instrumental in promoting the global unity of religions at COP28. So this is a big part of it. Somehow they have to bring the world's religions together if they're going to have a global system of government. And the Pope has been very involved in overseeing the construction of this complex, together with the top Islamic cleric from Egypt, whose name is Ahmed al-Taib. Those two are the main players in this that have overseen this construction. So I'm sure many delegates will make the trek to Abu Dhabi from Dubai to participate in this. In our fall issue, I went a step further because I just learned of this more recent development. A new interfaith partnership with the United Nations Environment Program has been announced, initiated by the Muslim Council of Elders in consultation with the Vatican. They're allied. You can't make this up. The goal to work with the United Nations Environmental Program's Faith for Earth Coalition, Faith for Earth Coalition, in bringing a stronger interfaith perspective to the United Nations COP28 Climate Summit. Toward that end, on May 29th, Pope Francis met with the Secretary General of the Muslim Council and the Director General of the United Arab Emirates Presidency. According to the Vatican News Service, I quote, this is coming straight from the Vatican, quote, they shared the possibility of launching a joint initiative on climate change. The initiative discussed in the Vatican will call on all religious institutions, leaders, and civil society organizations worldwide to unite towards achieving the shared goal of protecting the earth, our common home, end quote. So again, in the name of climate change, they're working behind the scenes to bring the religious leaders of the world together to support this, which ultimately is an agenda for a global system of government. So they're working the environmental front, they're working the religious front, they're working the political front, they're pushing global socialism. This Pope, this current Pope Francis, is involved up to his eyeballs on all these fronts. That's one reason, it's just my personal opinion, why the globalists are pushing so hard right now. Because they have a Pope in place who is totally supportive of what they are doing. And he's getting old. And they'd like to accomplish this while he's in place. And they also realize, now that they've shown their hand and they're going public with this, the clock is ticking, because the longer it takes them to pull it off, the more people are going to wake up to it and start opposing it. So they have various reasons for pushing as hard as they are. And I believe that is perhaps the chief reason for why they have launched this act of terrorism in the Middle East right now and create this war, and are trying to expand it. All right, the other conference I want to touch on will convene in September of 2024. It's known to globalists as the Summit of the Future. And it's expected to be the most important UN globalization gathering to date, the capstone event, if you will. According to the Federalist, which first broke this news, they said that at that conference, member nations, UN member nations, will adopt a pact for the future. There will be numerous radical proposals included in this agenda, including a United Nations plan for a new emergency platform that would give the UN significant powers in the event of future crises, global crises. The UN website admits that one of the purposes of the summit is to, quote, put in place a stronger international response playbook for complex global shocks, maximizing the use of the Secretary General's convening power in the form of an emergency platform, end quote. So they're basically telling us that. If this materializes, it would give the UN unprecedented emergency powers on a global scale. Many of the details of the UN's sought-after emergency platform were first presented last March in a policy paper. This policy paper gave several examples of what could extend emergency authority to the UN. The list includes a major climate event, future pandemic developments, a global digital connectivity disruption. By that, I assume they mean like a cyber attack or an EMP strike, a major event in outer space, among other unforeseen risks. Their words. So basically anything, any kind of global crisis they can use to declare an international emergency, and then all the countries who've signed on to this, and right now looks like the Biden administration is on track to do so, then it brings us under the authority of the UN, and we have to abide by whatever they say. In the case of a pandemic, whatever the World Health Organization says would go, and we would have to abide by that, or else who knows what will happen. In that policy paper, UN Secretary General Guterres declared, I quote him, "I propose that the General Assembly provide the Secretary General and the United Nations system with a standing authority to convene and operationalize automatically an emergency platform in the event of a future complex shock of sufficient scale, severity, and reach." This, it is explained, would give the UN the ability to drive an international response that would bring the stakeholders of the world together to ensure a unified global response to the crisis. And by the way, once enacted, the UN could extend its emergency powers for as long as it deems necessary. So don't expect to get any freedoms back that they take away from us at that point. It would probably be indefinite. The third meeting I want to touch on will happen between COP28 and the Summit of the Future. And it has to do with the Global Pandemic Treaty. I'm just curious, how many of you have heard of that being worked on? About half of you, okay. This gathering where all of this is to take place is going to be in May of 2024. That's when the 77th World Health Assembly is slated to convene in order to ratify this much anticipated global pandemic treaty. The Biden administration refers to it as an accord, because if it's in a treaty, it would require the approval of some of our elected officials. So just like the North American Free Trade Agreement, remember, they were able to bypass Congress and get it. It really was a treaty for all practical purposes, but they called it an agreement and they were able to get it in place. They're calling this an accord. Just a tactic that they're using, but successfully. The World Health Assembly is the decision-making body of the World Health Organization and is attended by delegations from all the World Health Organization member states, including the US. The specific agenda at next year's meeting is, in fact, the final approval and global implementation of this treaty. To expedite the effectiveness of the treaty, European nations have already begun implementing a digital global health passport. Denmark is the furthest along in this process, and the other European countries are expected to come on board quickly. According to Michelle Bachmann, who was actually present at last May's 76th World Health Assembly meetings on site in Geneva, Switzerland, where the meetings were held, got a lot of insight as to exactly what they have planned, and she has been on top of these developments. She said that a personal QR code will be assigned to every person and will be part of one's digital ID. And you'll need to have this digital ID/QR code to do anything. That's where they want to take things. So the question is, how would Americans respond to what I call a triple play? What if a pandemic lockdown, an economic collapse, and a crippling international war all were to occur at the same time? That's kind of the direction things are headed in right now. And I hope that doesn't happen, but this is the way things are trending. And then on top of that, you have all the draconian impositions related to climate change. So this is what the globalists want to pull off. And again, they want everything fully in place, full-blown world government functioning by 2030. Some of them call it the New World Order. Some of them call it the Great Reset. The World Economic Forum plays into this in a major way. A lot of money behind this. And some people ask me, why are these powerful globalist business tycoons supporting this? The only thing I can figure out is that they believe they will sit on top of global monopolies when this is said and done. They wouldn't do it unless they believe it's going to empower them in some way. But beyond that, and probably more importantly, there's a spiritual driving force behind this. If something is being driven purely by economic greed and lust for power, it usually doesn't last more than 1 or 2 generations. It fades out. This agenda has been going on for centuries. I mean, I read books back in the 1800s where they were talking about how they would like to eventually pull this off. And now we're living in the days to see it all come together. I don't think it would have held together this push if there wasn't a religious, occultic, spiritual commitment through the secret societies involved. And a lot of these people, they are as committed or more committed, sadly, to this agenda than Christians are to Christ and being obedient to Him. And that's why we're in the mess that we're in today in the world. So as I begin to wrap this up and save some time for Q&A, first of all, I would urge all of you to fervently pray regarding this global war that is unfolding, that our leaders, that even Biden would be smart enough to see that this is going to drag us into World War III and that it's not good, and that he's got to be very careful. That may or may not happen, but God can, he can do miracles. I would also say pray against martial law. If a crisis happens in this country, if there are acts of terror on a large scale, there's a possibility that martial law would be declared. And if that happens, you know, everybody with any common sense who's a pro-Constitution American would pretty much be forced underground. You wouldn't be able to operate the way that we do right now, at the very least. And I believe major persecution would begin at that point. So pray against martial law. That's very important. Secondly, prepare yourself spiritually. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For God did not give us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, of love, and of a sound mind." And Paul wrote this to Timothy to shore him up, because the Christians in that day, they were under the gun, so to speak. They were being pursued. We're not the first generation to have to deal with the possibility of persecution of Christians. But in order to be able to stand like that, we have to be walking more closely with the Lord than ever before. So cherish your personal relationship with the Lord and develop that. The Lord is willing to draw near to us if we draw near to Him. But if we're moving in a different direction and we're preoccupied with everything else under the sun, don't expect the Lord to guide us and direct us when everything goes down. Another verse that I like, I have this one on my desk, and that is, "The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and He knoweth them that trust in Him." The Lord sees what's going on in the world. He knows those who are with Him and those who aren't. So it's good to be on the right side in all of this, in short. Now, along with preparing yourselves spiritually, there is a place for physical preparation as well. In the past, I tried not to focus on this because I've seen a few people go bonkers with it, and that's all that they do, is make physical preparation, but their hearts are far away from the Lord. But I got so many requests from people saying, I am serving the Lord, I am walking with Him, but I need to know, it looks like things are going to be happening soon. What would you recommend that we have on hand if the power goes out for an extended period of time and things really get dicey? And so I prayerfully put together a list of about 30 items. Back in our winter issue of this past year, we posted those on our website. If you go to garykah.org and hover over the update center, I believe it's in our archives section now. Is that correct, Audrey? You'll see it. You'll find it there, a list of 30 items. And also the 2 articles that I quoted from this evening, you'll find those there too. The last 2 articles that we posted. And most people won't be able to do all those things and get all those things, so don't let it overwhelm you. It is just intended to help you think through things and prayerfully consider what the Lord would have you to do. If we are prepared as best as we can be, it will present us with an opportunity to be a more powerful witness for the Lord if things go down, because there are going to be a lot of confused people having no clue what's going on and really hurting, and it will put us in a position to be able to help and direct them toward the Lord. Thirdly, be proactive politically. Prayerfully and selectively contact your sheriff, the attorney general, your state reps, and federal reps. Now, why do I say prayerfully and selectively? Well, there's a term in the Bible, a saying, it says, don't cast your pearls before swine. If you know that some of these elected officials are intentionally on the other side and will work against Christians and conservative Jews, then you don't want to let them know what you're doing, right? But if you have a peace about it, about certain elected officials who you believe are open-minded enough to take something seriously, I would approach them. And if it was me, I would send them, actually there are 2 presentations that Michelle Bachmann has done recently covering the pandemic treaty and what's being planned there. And again, this is a first-hand account because she was there. Here's a credible former congresswoman, and they can choose not to listen to her, but then it's on them. They've heard it from someone who was actually there on site. Michelle stated that even some of her former colleagues in Congress have no clue about this, that it's going on, and she's been trying to reach them. So they need to hear from more of us to get them on the ball regarding this. And pray for Jim Jordan too. You know, I mean, he's been involved in these investigations and stuff. I don't know when the man sleeps. Now, you know, I wish he did become the next Speaker of the House. Right now, it looks like it may not happen. But for him to do everything he's doing, I understand why. There's only so much you can do. We understand that in our ministry. We're getting flooded with information in a way that I can't even read, not even maybe 30% of what's coming in to us. And so I can't imagine what some of these people are going through in Congress. And pray for them. Pray for them. But they need to hear from us. In my 2 most recent articles, I have links in there to Michelle's presentations that she gave. So you can just click on them and it'll take you right to them, okay? And again, that's on our website. Statewide elections, I'm going to skip that for the moment, but I come back to that during the Q&A if you'd like. So I just want to end on the note that it's so important that we remind ourselves of the hope that we have through our Lord Jesus Christ. We call ourselves Hope for the World. That's for a reason, because even though things are getting darker and worse in the world, we do have hope because of our faith in Christ. First and foremost, we have an eternal hope, because no matter what happens to us in this world, we have had an eternity with Christ promised to us. And I believe that wholeheartedly, and that's what should give us the strength to keep going every day. It's that eternal hope. We're here on this earth for a short time, and then it's eternity, right? The other hope that we have that's related to that is the fact that the Lord is going to return. There's a bottom line drawn across history. Things aren't going to go on indefinitely. He is going to return. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 says, when he does, He will overthrow the lawless one by the breath of his mouth and destroy him by the splendor of his coming. It's going to be a slam dunk, to use an Indiana basketball term. It won't be a contest. But between now and then, things are going to get more difficult. We have to be ready. And so anyway, I wanted to leave you with that. And also this week during my devotion time, morning reading, I came across these words written by Karen Huang. She said, God's rest includes his peace, confidence of salvation, reliance on his strength, and assurance of a future heavenly home. The guarantee of God and the salvation Jesus offers is why hope can be our anchor, holding us fast in times of need. And that's well said. So I'll close with that, and let's take a little bit of time for some Q&A. Yes, Tamara.
Briefly about the birth pains frequency, and also why, point number 2, why Israel is pertinent and why we need to be watching Israel, because some of that might be news.
Yes, okay. Israel obviously has been reborn in a way that couldn't have been imagined 100 years ago. Many of the reformers, they got a lot of things right, but back in their day, 500 years ago, put yourself back in their position. When it comes to Bible prophecy, Israel, that land was basically a desert at the time. So they tried to understand Bible prophecy as best they could at that time. And so they tried to symbolize it all and gave it symbolic meanings, thinking God's done with Israel. There's nothing going to happen here. And we can't be too hard on them, because if we'd have lived back then, we might have been guilty of doing the same thing. But when you look at what has happened now, a nation has never been reborn after 2,000 years. And I give credit to the Wesleys, who they actually wrote a song, six verses, right? Stanzas long, looking at the future, still over 100 years off, where they shared the story of Israel and how God was going to bring the Jews back in the land and how this was going to happen in the last days. So you got to credit them with that kind of simple faith that they took the Bible prophecies to heart. Charles Spurgeon, who's probably the most frequently quoted Christian leader from pulpits in the late 1800s, also strongly spoke about the fact that Israel would once again be reborn and become a nation, that the Jews would go back, that this was going to happen. Now, at that time, there were just a few thousand Jews living there. It was just a desolate land. Going back to Jesus' time for just a moment, do you know that only about 25 to at most 35% of the Jews in the world were present in Israel? Over the years, when I'd read the Bible prophecies and the stories of Jesus, I always just assumed in my mind that all the Jews were there in Israel. That wasn't the case. It was only between a quarter and a third of them. Most of them never came back from Babylonian captivity. And even before that time, Jewish communities had sprung up around the Mediterranean. So only a fraction of the Jews were in the land when Jesus was there. Today, out of 15.5 million Jews in the world, according to the Israeli government, over 7.2 million are back in the land, and that's something like 45%. That's incredible when you think about that. When you had a fourth to a third of the Jews in the world, and now you've got right at half. That's a miracle that many Jews are back in the land, and within the next couple of years, it will be right at 50%. Now, of the remaining Jews in the world, which would be what? 7.2 away from 15.5, a little bit over 8 million Jews in the world. Right at 6 million are in the United States, which is about 75% of all the Jews in the world living outside of Israel. which that alone to me makes you wonder what kind of role the U.S. is, what's going to happen in the U.S. in the days ahead. Because you've got over 2/3, right around 3/4 of all the Jews in the world outside of Israel are in this country right now. That's why I believe there's going to be a major exodus out of this country, probably under very difficult circumstances in the days ahead. And we're keeping an eye on that through Operation Exodus USA and Ebenezer. Because when the war in Ukraine started, Jews came pouring out into Poland, Hungary, and other places, and from there making their way back to Israel. Ezekiel 36, let's go there, because there's so many prophetic passages I could pick from, but for the sake of time, some people would say, well, the Jews don't deserve to have their own land. They rejected their Messiah, and so on and so forth. This passage is difficult to argue with here. It's in Ezekiel 36, which is a lead-in to Ezekiel 37, 38, and 39 that are end-time passages involving developments in the Middle East. I'm going to start reading in verse 18. And again, this is Ezekiel 36. Here God is speaking through the prophet Ezekiel. He says, "So I poured out my wrath on them, because they had shed blood in the land and because they had defiled it with their idols. I dispersed them among the nations, and they were scattered through the countries. I judged them according to their conduct and their actions. And wherever they went among the nations, they profaned my holy name. For it was said of them, 'These are the Lord's people,' and yet they had to leave his land. I had concern for my holy name, which the house of Israel profaned among the nations where they had gone. Therefore, say to the house of Israel, 'This is what the sovereign Lord says. It is not for your sake, O house of Israel, that I am going to do these things, but for the sake of my holy name, which you have profaned among the nations where you have gone. I will show the holiness of my great name, which has been profaned among the nations, the name you have profaned among them. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord, declares the sovereign Lord, when I show myself holy through you before their eyes. For I will take you out of the nations. I will gather you from all the countries and bring you back into your own land. I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from all your impurities and from all your idols. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh, and I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. You will live in the land I gave your forefathers. You will be my people, and I will be your God." It's pretty powerful. Now, if you think, well, that's just one passage of Scripture, so let's look at another one real quick here. Joel chapter 3. And when it says God will put a new spirit in them, I believe that's in process. There are right now so many Jews accepting Christ in Israel. It's amazing. Through ministries like Chosen People Ministries, one for Israel that is doing a phenomenal job. They actually have testimonies of rabbis who've accepted Jesus as Messiah. And it's powerful among the population. And that's not being told to people over here. Most people have no idea of that going on. But Jews who are believers witnessing to other Jews now in a major way. Okay, Joel chapter 3. Joel only has 3 chapters, so this is the last one. Beginning in verse 1. In those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, also known as the valley of Jezreel or the valley of Armageddon, in the northern part of Israel. There I will enter into judgment against them concerning my inheritance, my people Israel, for they scattered my people among the nations and divided up my land. Verse 17, then you will know that I, the Lord your God, dwell in Zion, my holy hill. Jerusalem will be holy. Never again will foreigners invade her. Again, that hadn't been fulfilled yet because Jerusalem has been trampled on for how many centuries, right? It says, never again will foreigners invade her. Verse 20, Judah will be inhabited forever and Jerusalem through all generations. Their blood guilt, which I have not pardoned, I will pardon. The Lord dwells in Zion. That's how that book ends. One more, real quick, I want to go over to Zechariah. Book of Zechariah, chapter 12. Here we go. Chapter 12. I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. On that day when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves. Verse 9, on that day I will set out to destroy all the nations that attack Jerusalem. Verse 10, and I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son. On that day, the weeping in Jerusalem will be great. In other words, the Jews are going to come to the point where they recognize that Jesus is in fact the Messiah and was their Messiah all along, and they missed it until this time. In Matthew chapter 23, I won't go there, but toward the end, right before Jesus launches into the Olivet Discourse, he's in talking about Jerusalem. He says, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. In other words, until you recognize that. He doesn't say it won't ever happen. He says until, indicating at some point way in the distance. Now, I'll wrap up with a few verses from chapter 14 of Zechariah. It says, I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. And then in verse 3 it says, then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as he fights the day of battle. In other words, he'll draw the nations in, not because he's against Israel, but to have an opportunity to destroy them. He's going to draw them in together, and that's in Revelation, it's referred to as the Battle of Armageddon. Anyway, it says, then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle. On that day, his feet will stand in New York City. No, it doesn't say that. In London, no. Tokyo, no. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives east of Jerusalem. And the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a great valley with half the mountain moving north and half moving south. You will flee by my mountain valley, for it will extend to Azel. You will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come and all the holy ones with him. It's clearly referring to the second coming in the Old Testament. And this has not yet been fulfilled. It's not about any other city, it's Jerusalem. This is where it's going to happen. So do you think it's a coincidence that so much of the world's news today centers on Jerusalem? No. But there can be a question, a legitimate question asked, where are we at right now? Is this battle that is unfolding, is this going to be the Battle of Armageddon? I personally don't believe that's the case. I believe it's possible. Some believe it's going to be the Psalm 83 war, because the specific players announced in Psalm 83, not all of them have been involved before. So some argue that is still an unfulfilled prophecy. Or it could simply be the beginnings of World War III. If you think about it, World War I led to the forming of the League of Nations, the first step toward a global system. World War II led to the forming of the United Nations, with a much bigger infrastructure for global government, but the UN does not have the power that it seeks. Would it not stand to reason that a third world war would set the stage then for globalists to try to take humanity into a full-blown system of global government with the Antichrist seated over this for a time? And I believe what we're seeing today is the makings of creating that scenario that will usher in the Antichrist. That's where I believe we're at right now. And I believe Israel's going to be forced, their back is going to be forced to the wall. It's going to be different from previous wars because the nations surrounding them have technology they didn't have before. They're better prepared. They have more rockets and missiles aimed at them. It's going to be bloody. It's going to be bloody. But I believe ultimately, once all this shakes out and a global system is established, the Antichrist ends up in charge for a time of this. I believe the Jewish people and many other people of the world are going to realize, wow, we fell for this false peace, this peace plan, thinking it would finally bring peace, because people are going to be tired of war. They're tired. People of Israel, they're tired of being surrounded and being hated by everybody. So it appears to me that the stage is being set for some type of huge international plan to be presented to bring order out of chaos. And when that happens, then things really get bad, but only for a short period of time. And God, the Lord Jesus Christ, when he returns, will put a stop to that. And if you read Romans 11, it talks about how all Israel will be saved, meaning I believe the people alive at that time who will embrace Jesus as Messiah, not just many Gentiles, but also Jews. But it will be under difficult circumstances. So I could go on, but that's kind of there's so many prophetic passages in the Old Testament, and they're reiterated to some extent in different ways in the book of Revelation and Matthew chapter 24, 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 Thessalonians 5, and other passages. So it's really coming down out there right now. Yes?
What can we say to those that, along the lines of what you said, is set up to the globalist agenda? I know some people that are thinking along the lines of the globalists know that Christians are following the timeline of the Bible, and we're expecting where this is leading to the end time, or that we're in the end time, and that they're deliberately following Scripture to make it appear that way. So a lot of Christians in the world don't fight it, just as it comes.
Yeah. Yeah, we've seen that some. Yeah, and something else that concerns me, if people believe that this unfolding war, if it does expand, if they begin calling this Armageddon, what happens at Armageddon? That's when Jesus comes and destroys the forces of the Antichrist, right? According to Scripture. So if people believe that this is Armageddon, what they would expect is Christ to return at that time. But what if it's the Antichrist and he steps on the scene and perhaps claiming to be the Christ? I don't know, but this is one possible scenario. What if the Antichrist steps on the scene after this global conflict and appears to save the day with this incredible plan that he's got for world peace and to stop the fighting and to unite the major religions of the world? And if he proposes to be the second coming of Christ to Christians, the Messiah to the Jews, the Imam Mahdi to the Muslims, you could see how this could happen, because it is going to be huge deception. Somehow the Antichrist is going to step on the scene in a way that's going to throw people off. And so if people think this war is it, this is Armageddon, and read that into it, they could potentially set them up for that deception, to accept the Antichrist as if he was Christ. And then the real, the terrible times, the Great Tribulation begins at that time. I don't trust the World Economic Forum further than I can throw a stone, And of course, but they're definitely set on 2030 as a date for having this global system in place. So we do know that they are pushing hard to get that part of it in place, to make a global system of government possible. But what deception awaits us from a spiritual standpoint exactly remains to be seen. But the fact that this Pope has overseen a complex where on that complex you have a Christian church, a Jewish synagogue, and Islamic mosque. I forgot to mention that earlier. and a convention center where people can meet and convene. So he's actively working on, the Pope is, on trying to unify the world's religions, and he has a lot of backing. You've got groups like the World Council of Churches, which has been promoting interfaithism now for some time. Virtually all of your mainline church denominations in the United States are members of the World Council of Churches. Except for some of the smaller evangelical churches, most of them are involved in that. And even in the Southern Baptist Convention, you've got two segments. You've got those who want to go back to the basics of the Bible, and you've got those that are pushing in the general direction of the World Council of Churches and interfaithism. So every denomination has that. They have people that have crept in and are trying to influence this. So that, to me, that's where the biggest deception is going to occur, is in the spiritual realm, and the realm of religion and religious deception. Yes.
I preached from Revelation 13 this past week. Well, I think a lot of us felt, seeing you mentioned it pretty well, about actually the religious aspect. Actually, the false prophet is going to be very prominent. And he's the one that will perform signs, even calling fire down from heaven. He will cause the people to take the mark of the beast of the Antichrist. It's a false prophet has a huge play in this.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's
a lot of people run right to the Antichrist, but false prophet's going to set up the Antichrist.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And that's a religious type of influence that the false prophet, even the terminology the Bible uses, false prophet. No, you're exactly right.
The Pope this past week has decided that they need to start blessing homosexual marriages.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
There's no area that I'm aware of where he's not on board with the globalists. In fact, in some areas, he's at the forefront. We did an article about 2 years back where he started a special economic council. Audrey, do you remember the name of that? The Guardians of something. I can't remember. We deal with so much information. It's just information overload sometimes. Forgive me. But the Guardians of something. And he's got a council of overseers that are over these other powerful economic leaders of the world. And it's like a who's who. People from major insurance companies, credit cards, major big pharma. It covers a lot of bases. And who did he put in charge of that? Lady Lynn Forrester de Rothschild from London. So there's this alliance between the world's wealth and the big globalists pushing that, and the Vatican. It's all there. People they're lazy. They don't do the research, or maybe some people don't have the way of finding out about that. But so this has been coming together for quite some time, but it's reaching a crescendo now. And I feel like this war that's brewing, if it keeps going the way it is, could kind of be the final piece that propels everything forward. But no, you're exactly right. Yeah, the false prophet, the Antichrist, are working hand in hand. Climate change is their big thing. Yeah.
And it's all, it's funny, as Christians, we worship Father God. To them, it's Mother Earth.
Yeah.
It's goddess worship.
Yeah. You're right. Gaia.
Goddess worship.
Yeah.
And that's why these people are so fanatical about it. For them, it's religion. This is their religion.
Yeah. It is a religious movement, the climate change religion. If you look at what some of these people believe, in fact, Earth Day has become a major holiday for them. It's a religious event. And if you look at the statements and the quotes, we have a slew of them that we've collected over the years. You've got people that, basically worshiping the earth. There's a huge spike in paganism and witchcraft type meetings, pantheistic meetings, all that kind of stuff that takes place around that time each year in celebration of Earth Day. And again, most Christians aren't aware of that because we don't move in those circles. But it's gotten to be a big, big event at the United Nations as well. Yeah, there was a hand that went up way in the back. Okay. Yes, sir. You.
Talking about the Pope and all doing that, and I think somewhere not long ago that there's cardinals or bishops or something in the Vatican that are trying to bring him down, take him out of office. Is that true? So
Yeah. Archbishop Mario, help me. I can't think of his last name. Pardon me?
You talking about Vigiano?
Yes, Vigano, or Vigano, some say Vigano. He has come out very strong for about 2.5 years, 3 years. His first big letter came out leading up to the election that put Trump out, and it warned that the U.S. was basically, if these globalists succeed in stopping their opposition in the upcoming election, that Biden, if he gets into power, is so compromised and blackmailable that he'll do everything they want him to do. And that's pretty much what we've seen take place. He put his neck on the line. He's about 80 years old. I watched a couple of videos of him, and he's been pretty spot on in what he warned about. Yes, sir.
James McClure, you don't need to call me sir, Gary.
Okay.
As a knowledgeable Catholic, there are no provisions under canon law to remove the city.
There are.
No, there are not.
It starts with admonished at least 2 to 3 times in writing, and then they take it to the faithful. I've got it right.
I understand what you're saying, but unfortunately, if you examine canon law, it can't be removed under no circumstances. In the old days, they removed them due to other circumstances, but
It completed the first 4 steps.
Well, yeah, regardless, yeah.
So there is provision, and they completed it.
Yeah, right now, thus far, he must have some powerful people backing him that he's been able to make it this far in there, you know. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you've got that taking place within Catholicism, and you've got the seminaries and Protestant circles that have been so penetrated. It's sickening. I mean, the school that I went to years ago, it's where I met my wife, and so I'm partial to that school, and there were some fine Christian people there. But already back then, they had professors in the seminary teaching that there are other pathways to God, including through Buddha. We have friends that went there, and it totally screwed them up. They went there to be pastors, and get one of them, when he was done, this broke my heart because he's a friend of mine. His name was Don, and he went there to become a pastor, play the guitar, led worship, was this really neat young man. And by the time he left, his main goal in life was to go and live in Switzerland and study at the Carl Jung Institute, which, if you know anything about that, it's one of the most blatantly occult organizations in the world. Jung had a huge influence on today's New Age movement. So he did a 180, it flipped him around. When his parents sent him to a Christian school, I guarantee you they weren't expecting that to happen. So even in professing Christian colleges, you have to be careful because these professors have crept in. Audrey had a Hindu biology professor, and the head of the biology department at that time was an atheist, openly in class. This was a Christian college here in Indiana that everybody would recognize if I told you the name. Now again, I knew of some godly professors who were there, so we got both, but that element had crept in. Yes, sir.
Governor Abbott of Texas is taking very definite steps to curtail and lessen the influx on this border. The state legislators made these laws. You see New Mexico, Arizona, California following that, or is it just going to be a Lone Star State doing this?
Probably not, but it's possible. But I would recommend, just as we begin to wrap up here, I would recommend to people, if I was talking to the whole nation right now, I say the best chance we have politically is on a state-by-state basis. Federally, they control pretty much everything now. But an example I can give you out of South Dakota, I've been using this. Kristi Noem, she's getting ready to sign a piece of legislation. You know, they give you these documents that are this thick. Nobody has time to read all of them. But she actually sat down and decided to go through it. And it had to do with ushering in CBDC currencies, central bank digital currencies. And after she read it, she said, I'm not going to sign this. And so it depends a lot on the governors. I like what I'm seeing from Sarah Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas. She's on it. Kristi Noem, Texas, Florida. They're all different situations, but you've got governors that have taken a pretty strong stand on things. Tennessee is another state that could factor in. What if 5 or 10 states buck the tide? You know, Florida and Texas alone have well over 50 million people. I mean, they're economically about the same as a European nation, and so I'm waiting to see what happens there. It's going to have to almost take place on a state-by-state basis. But as far as the coasts go, you know, look, Gavin Newsom, they tried to recall him, and he's voted back in. And a number of the counties in California want to break away, form a different state. Oregon, the eastern half, wants to join with Idaho. But the people who are in control have such a lock on things at the state capitals that they can't do anything. So I think it's going to be up to the heartland and parts of the South. And we'll see what happens. But I do believe God honors people when they take a righteous stand and when they themselves repent and are operating in the proper spirit of repentance. We'll see where things, you know, go with that. So
That's the core why Trump was hated more than anything else, because he's not a globalist.
yeah,
I mean, that's why he's hated.
yeah. He came in and he opposed their agenda, and they didn't like it too much, did they? They still don't. They're doing everything they can. Yeah. Well, you want to come up? Yeah.
And we'll tell I'd like to say good night and thank you for coming.